Hello, my name is Christof Bernau, and I work at the Center for Agroecology here at UC Santa Cruz. And today we're going to talk about pruning raspberries and blackberries with a focus on floricane type of blackberries. Floricanes and primicanes are the two primary growth habits that you will find in raspberries and blackberries. Both are long-lived perennials that can produce fruit over many, many years, but they bear their fruit in different ways. Plants that have the floricane growth habit, they essentially bear their fruit on second-year wood. In the first year of growth, a new cane pushes up from below ground and develops vegetatively, but does not produce any fruit. Then it is left more or less unpruned over the winter, and then in the second season, short laterals will grow out, and from there flowers will be developed, be pollinated hopefully if the bees do their thing, and then from there we will get delicious fruit to eat. In the case of the primicane blackberries and raspberries, they produce their fruit on first year wood, or what some people will call current season's wood. So a cane pushes up from below ground at the beginning of the season, continues to develop, and then later in the season you will get laterals to push out of those principal canes, flowers, pollination, and fruit set. In catalogs, you will often see the floricane types that bear on second year wood. You'll often see them listed as either June bearing or summer bearing, or alternate terms you might encounter. The primicane types are also often listed as fall bearing or ever bearing. And essentially the idea is that the fruit comes later in the season, because first the entire cane has to develop, then laterals, then flowers. Whereas in the case of the floricanes, like what I'm standing in front of here, the cane has already been developed the previous year, and then we simply have to grow laterals, flowers, and pollination and fruit set. Let me give you an example. I'm going to harvest a cane out of here as a starting point. So this is an unpruned cane that was in its second year of growth in this last growing season. We're midwinter now, but in year one, this cane pushed up from below ground, but it had not yet produced all of these laterals. We left it unpruned over the winter, or in some cases, if they get really tall, you might choose to come through and make a heading cut just to shorten it. Then at the beginning of year two, axillary buds on the stems here begin to develop. They push out, develop these laterals, flowers form, the buds emerge and break, they get pollinated, and then we get nice fruit set, and then they mature. Relatively early in the season though, because the bulk of the growth in terms of the cane had already happened the previous year. So when we go through this planting, my goal for winter pruning is essentially to identify what already bore fruit, and then I'm going to trace those canes down to the base and cut them down essentially right at ground level. So in looking at this section of this row here, you'll see that some of these look to be just vegetative, and in fact they still have some current season's leaf growth on them. But then I also see all of these little lateral stubs with the spent flower clusters here. And so my goal as a pruner is to identify those and then trace them back down to the bottom of the plant. So for example, this cane here, lots and lots of laterals, lots of fruit was born. I'm going to follow it down to the bottom of the plant and identify where it's coming from, and then cut it and remove it. I find that most of the time a good sharp pair of hand pruners will do the job. Sometimes you really need a pair of loppers, a little bit bigger or heavier duty tool, because the stems are just really thick. Depending on how enmeshed the branches are or the canes are that you're trying to remove, you may be able to just pull the entire cane in one pull, but you may also find that it's really tangled up in its neighbors, and that it's a little bit easier to kind of piece it apart and take smaller sections, but ultimately I'm still trying to make sure I remove all of that previous season's growth. So if I keep looking here, I see other spent ones. I see another one here. I'm going to pull this one out, trace this down to the ground, and remove that one. Follow this one over here. I see it's coming right down to here. I may have to. And then I'm just going to try to carefully weave this out here. Keep looking. I've got several more. They're kind of hidden behind the first year growth, but I've got several more canes that I need to follow down to their point of origin and then pull them out. When everything is all said and done, and I still have a little ways to go here, even in this section, but when everything is all said and done, you will not have clear cut the plants because you're leaving behind all of the first year growth that is going to be this year's fruit, but you will have removed a substantial portion of the canopy, and it's going to look a lot thinner, a lot less crowded than it may have previously looked. So, see who else I might have here. I'm going to follow. Here's a second year cane that's coming from this side. This is another one that was immediately overlapping with that one, but it has a different point of origin. It's actually coming from right there. So let's see, here's one more, also coming from this same spot here. And we're getting close at this point, but we're not quite there. So this one's a little coming from a little bit out of the picture. So for right now, at least I'm just going to take the top of this out. Here's another big long one. You might also notice, like right here, really small kind of spindly cane. My preference is to remove those entirely as well, whether they're first or second year canes. For the most part, those really spindly canes tend not to produce much fruit, tend to just sap a little bit of energy from the plants as a whole. And in some cases, if there's enough of them, they may really reduce air circulation within the plant and be a source, a contributor to disease potential in your planting if they are taking up too much space and really crowding their neighbors. So almost there. I got a couple more stems that I want to follow and trace out. You'll notice, by the way, that I'm doing this barehanded with blackberries. This happens to be a thornless variety called Triple Crown that is a really tasty and productive variety, and it's one that was bred and selected to be thornless. And I will say for certain, from a care and management perspective, thornless blackberries have a real nice advantage. Harvesting is easier, pruning, trellising, training, everything is easier because you're not contending with a bunch of sharp thorns like you would find on many older varieties of blackberries and certainly on the wild or Himalayan blackberries. So I'm almost there. Looks like just one or two minor cleanup. Now, now I'm pretty much down to, I'm just kind of trying to look at this, make sure I didn't miss anybody. But yeah, I'm pretty much, except for, okay, I see one more here that I want to remove. Now, the rest of my row, I've got more work to do, but at least in this section that's right in front of us, if you look closely, now you'll see there's nobody left that bore flowers last year, except for that one. Now I only have what I'll call first year growth that is about to be second year growth, about to be fruitful. These canes that are left behind, I now have to do a little bit of work. I would like to, across the vertical, both vertical and horizontal space here, I want to spread them out evenly across this plane, up against my trellis, and then I also want them to use, essentially to use all of the space available, but not be too cramped and crowded. Most of the time people will train them in a way that keeps them upright until you get to the top of the trellis. And I tend to, there's a series of wires here. We actually, instead of just using wire, we also have some old drip tape stretched to act as though it's a wire, to essentially be repurposed. But I want to come through and take all my canes and bend and weave them through the trellis so they're not going to move around too much. As I'm doing that though, I have to be careful. They're pliable, but if I push them too far, they'll break. And if they break, then most likely I'm going to need to prune them out and remove them, because I've now got a damaged, injured cane. You also notice, like, this cane here is a really tall cane. I kind of have two principal options here. I can first do my weaving back and forth as I come up to the top of my trellis, and then I can do one of two principal things. And there's a lot of variation on this as well, but I could do one of two things here. I can either now cut it to just above the height of the trellis, because that's going to be real nice working height. It's going to be easy to harvest, easy to manage from this point forward. But I am sacrificing some of the potential fruiting zone. So another alternative, especially if you don't have that many canes, it's a little bit sparser. Another really nice alternative is to take the cane once it gets to the top of your trellis, and then either with some tie tape or just by weaving, take the top of that cane and then weave it on your horizontal wire. And then that gives you more bearing surface overall. If we look at any one of these canes, you'll see, and actually this is a good one, I'm going to take this back out as an example. If we look at this, I've got leaves from this current season. Because our climate is relatively mild, they haven't dropped off yet. In a colder climate, these plants would have lost all of their leaves. But in our fairly mild winters, oftentimes these leaves will stay in place until the axillary bud that is right at the base of the leaf on the stem, here and here. In fact, if I remove these leaves, they may be a hair easier to see. There's an axillary bud there and there. And when that axillary bud swells, it's gonna, in most instances, it's gonna push off these old leaves. A new leaf will emerge, and then this is where the laterals are going to emerge that ultimately become your fruiting sites, like what we had in the canes that we pulled out. So this was my axillary bud. It swells, a leaf forms there, typically. Shoot comes out, and then it terminates in these flower clusters. They've mostly been knocked off here, but this is the direction that we're heading with the buds that we have here. So when I think, so I'm going to come back, I'm not 100% done. I do want to do a little bit more training and kind of weave things through here, but for the sake of getting you to the next level, you know, the main thing I would say is once you've pruned out your second year canes, then your goal is to spread out the remaining canes as evenly as possible. Also to make some choices. If you see anybody really weak and spindly, you can prune those out because they're not going to end up being very fruitful and may actually contribute to disease problems. And then within the next month or so, we should start to see, coming from the base of the plant, new shoots beginning to break. We're still in the middle of winter, so this hasn't happened yet, but within the next month or so, new shoots are going to emerge from the base of these plants, and they're going to come up and be our 1-year-old canes that will be next year's fruit. What was a first-year cane last year, we've left behind. We've either trained horizontally or we've topped it at about the height of the trellis, and then all of this is going to be the source of this year's fruitfulness. And that is essentially the key. We will talk about the pruning of primocane types in a video that focuses on raspberries, because most raspberries, not all, but most raspberries that are available grow in more of the primocane habit, whereas most, but not all, blackberry types that are available grow in the floricane habit, where they're bearing on second year wood as opposed to first year wood of the primocane types.